Hi, welcome to an introduction to the Enneagram. I would imagine that some of you are familiar with the Enneagram, maybe very familiar. Some of you have just kind of heard about it because it is like being talked about these days. And maybe you know nothing of the Enneagram. This is appropriate for all of those categories. This is a mini workshop, really, to give you a basic understanding of an overall view of the Enneagram and how it applies to you personally and how it applies to our world, our present day world. This also serves as a preview for a much larger body of knowledge, a deeper dive into both the psychological and the spiritual aspects of the Enneagram. An experience that really is ancient and spiritually intended. There is a 10-part series that is available if any of you are more interested after the introduction. Dear Lord, so far today, I've done all right. I haven't gossiped, haven't lost my temper, haven't been greedy, grumpy, nasty, selfish, or overindulgent. I'm very thankful for that. But in a few minutes, God, I'm going to get out of bed. And from then on, I'm probably going to need a lot more help. Amen. So I started with that little joke because it seems to be universally related to that we all find ourselves in this quandary of knowing that there is a much better way to live, a much higher aspect of ourselves that we can access, but yet have a tremendous difficulty in actually embodying that process. And I just find a lot of people kind of in the middle of that question right now. There's a saying that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Well, I kind of see that saying as going like this. When the student is ready, the teaching appears. And then, of course, there are facilitators for those teachings. But I consider this a great teaching that has appeared for us now because many of us are ready. There are 3 events in my life that changed the trajectory of my life totally. And you might have these yourself. So the first one was many years ago when I was 24 years old. I discovered yoga, or I should say yoga discovered me, because it just showed up via a book that was almost a book I found by mistake, the only book at the time that I know of. And yoga changed everything for me. I do not remember who I was before yoga. The second major event in my life that changed everything for me was parenthood. When I became a mother, I could not remember ever being not a mother. And if any of you are parents, I know you know what I mean. Changes everything. And the third one is the Enneagram. The Enneagram also came to me in a very serendipitous way. It was left in the back seat of a car that I was supposed to be looking after because its owner was gone for some time. And it was very worn, and I opened it up and I was just amazed. I read it from beginning to end, and that was 17 years ago, and that changed my life again, forever. So what brought you here today to this introduction? Was it curiosity? Was the recommendation of a friend that you really like and respect? Was it knowledge of the Enneagram? Was it wanting or expecting a better understanding of yourself? Was it uh, um, about understanding others? There may be, for some of you, a very deep longing happening right now, a yearning for really much deeper self-transformation. I can say that the Enneagram addresses all of these that I just mentioned and more. So many of you, I'm sure, are intuiting that there, and maybe you have your whole life, intuit something more to this existence, something more, a greater reality. And you most likely have been asking yourself the questions: who am I? Who are we? Why are we here? What part are we playing in this whole ecosystem? And why are we here now? Now, the Enneagram answers all those questions. It was meant to answer all those questions. The Enneagram is outside all dogma. It predates all religion, any religion, major religion that we could name right now. It is outside of race. It is outside of culture, age, gender, class, politics, sexuality. Did I miss any? Did I miss any polarities? If you can find another polarity, the Enneagram is outside of it. Even though the Enneagram has become very popular now, mostly people see it or have heard of it as a personality profile, a typology, which is only really a surface understanding of the Enneagram. Whenever esoteric knowledge, this is esoteric knowledge means hidden, long time hidden knowledge. Whenever esoteric knowledge surfaces to the masses, it tends to get watered down. It tends to get distorted. It starts to lose its spiritual essence. I mean, that happened with yoga, where people think that it's just some kind of exercise. And it is happening with the Enneagram, where people think that it is just a personality profile. The Enneagram was always intended to be multidimensional and to address the many levels of human consciousness. Always meant to be a spiritual path. The history of the Enneagram is fascinating. It's ancient in origin, and when I say ancient, I mean ancient. They used to think that the Enneagram was about 4,000 years old and went back to Babylon, which is now Iraq. But now they know it can be traced back 10,000 years. Who knows what was happening 10,000 years ago, right? It can be traced back 10,000 years to the Sarkmoon Brotherhood, they were called. Traveling mystics, traveling contemplatives who were dedicated to having a prayerful life. They started to discover things about themselves. So it is the weaving together, really, of almost any philosophy, any mystical tradition, all the spiritual principles that we've ever heard of throughout all time. And we can kind of trace it then through history. So we can trace it back to Egypt. We can trace it back to the Essenes before Jesus. We can trace it back to Greece. We can trace it back to the Roman times, and then all through the Middle Ages and the Christian mystics. We can trace it back to the Sufis, who it does seem like they were the ones that kept these sacred teachings hidden until humanity maybe was ready, or at least until someone in the Western culture discovered them. And that person was called Gurdjieff. Georges Gurdjieff, you may have heard that name. So he discovered the Enneagram. He was taken to a Sufi monastery somewhere high in the mountains that he was blindfolded, and he never knew where he had gone. He was blindfolded on the way out as well. He spent 8 years there from the age 21 to the age 29. And he's the one that brought the Enneagram into the Western world, into modern life, which was around 1920, the early 1920s. It's interesting because he said at that time that it would take about 100 years for mankind to be ready for this information, for this knowledge. You might have heard of Rudolf Steiner, was a contemporary of Gurdjieff around the 1920s as well. Steiner, Waldorf schools, Steiner, he said the same thing. He said it would take about 100 years for people to understand what the Waldorf education or philosophy of education was. And that is now 2023, 100 years later. Krishnamurti is said to have said something similar. Ernest Holmes of Science of Mind said something similar. And other contemporaries at that time seemed to have a sense that about now, things were going to be coming together in a way that we would all be able to understand this knowledge. So I'm sure you're aware that we are indeed in the midst of great change on planet Earth. Yes, interesting times, as they would say, individually, culturally, historically, and even cosmically. We're at the end of many cycles, one of which I'll mention right now, which is a giant 5,000-year cycle, which is the cycle of yugas, which comes out of Hinduism and comes out of India. And there are 4 yugas, and we are at the end of what they call the Kali Yuga. And that is a yuga of destruction. It's a dark night of the soul. It's an age of tremendous darkness in terms of knowledge and what we know. It was like a very, very long period of time. It goes back 5,000 years from now. So we are now at the beginning of a new age, and the new age is called the Satya Yuga, and Satya means truth in Sanskrit. So we are at the beginning of an age of truth, another very long age. But the thing is, we're just turning that corner right now. We're like at the bottom, and we're trying to get around this very sharp turn into this age of light. The Aquarian age sometimes is called a paradigm shift, sometimes it's called. But for sure, we are in an age of accelerated growth, and this is the first time our whole planet is experiencing the same collective push to wake up. Like everybody can feel it everywhere. There's a radical shift in consciousness taking place, and it is addressed in the Enneagram. These wake-up calls are addressed as shock points. We are in the middle of a series of shock points. They come along throughout history. They are intrinsic to the fabric of the universe, not just the Enneagram. It's just that the Enneagram names them. An example, they are intended to wake us up. An example would be 9/11 was a shock point, yes. The financial meltdown in 2008 was a shock point. Let's see, well, the biggie, COVID, major shock point, and we've been having aftershocks ever since. And we may be in the middle of another one if you are hearing this now in the midst of the Israel-Palestine conflict, another major wake-up call. These shock points are intended to initiate major transitions, threshold experiences where the old is intended to fall away. These shock points create cracks in the existing institutions and the existing paradigm and the existing thought systems of the time. It's an apocalypse of sorts. Apocalypse means to reveal, and we are in an apocalypse of the ego, where a time of revelation, where we're seeing all the old come up to the surface, the underbelly, you might say, that needs to fall away. The old paradigm needs to fall away, and it is falling away. It is falling away. That's why these times are so uncertain and albeit scary for many of us. Now, it's interesting because when we're in these transition times, the old is falling away, but the new has not yet formed. So we're in the middle. And that's where we are right now. It's kind of a limbo state. We're in the middle. Now, what is the old paradigm? The old paradigm is grounded in the idea of separation, separation from our source, separation from each other, separation from the earth, and separation from ourselves, from our essential nature, our true nature. Therefore, it puts us into tremendous fear, and we start to function out of almost everything we do is out of survival. So the old paradigm is an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That's the old paradigm. And the institutions that are based on that assumption, an eye for an eye and tooth for tooth, are breaking up. They have to. They will not be able to sustain the new paradigm, which is we are all one, and there is nothing in the universe that is not interdependent with everything else in the universe. So essence consciousness, you could say, is based on the interconnectedness of all life, oneness. Now that is the opposite of separation. It is the opposite of just living for survival. It is the opposite of do unto others as they did unto you. That's the old paradigm. The new paradigm is, of course, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, because we are one. The veil is thinner now. I like to call this thin times. The veil between dimensions, between levels of consciousness, between frequencies. A lot of the ancient disciplines are resurfacing now. Yoga is one, acupuncture and Chinese medicine is one, Ayurvedic medicine is another, and the Enneagram, of course. They're all showing up now, I think, to help us with this transition in consciousness that we're trying to make. And as I mentioned, Gurdjieff and many others predicted it for this time. The time is now. Now, the Enneagram is unique, and I feel at this point unsurpassable in its specificity on how to navigate these shifts in consciousness, these shock points. It was built into the Enneagram how to do this. So what is this interesting diagram here? What is the Enneagram then? This is called a yantra. A yantra is like a mantra, only it's visible. It's visual. So a mantra, I'm sure you all know, is sound, like Om is the universal mantra, the universal sound. This is a yantra, a visual. If you're familiar at all with Tibetan Buddhism, you know that there are many, many yantras in their tradition. They use them to bring forth intuition and insight. So that is this. Okay, it's sacred geometry in this kind of weird looking figure here. It is a map, actually, not to somewhere, not a map of distance, but a map of no distance, a map to higher consciousness. If you know how to use this, it is an actual map to higher consciousness. It is a psycho-spiritual tool. And that means that it addresses our psychology, the way the mind is wired, the structure of the mind, the structure of the ego, and also addresses how that very structure is a doorway into the essence of us, into our true nature. So the Enneagram, again, does not stop at the personality. That is the gateway. That's the beginning. But at the same time, the personality has to be addressed because that addresses the doorway for us. Okay, let's look at the configuration here of the Enneagram. This is my handy dandy little PowerPoint here. Okay, this is what the Enneagram is made up with, that yantra we just looked at. This is what it's made up of. And the first thing it's made up of is a circle. And that is the law of one. And that means that we are all one. We come from one source, one singularity. Whether you believe in the Big Bang or you believe in a creator, you believe in even any aspect of how we got started, it is agreed upon. We got started from one point. Okay, that is the law of one. There is nothing outside of this circle. There is nothing outside of the law of one. It is impossible to exist outside of this. All existence is in this circle, this law of one. Cool, huh? Then we take the triangle and we put it on top of the circle. And this is the law of three. You might have guessed that. In that we live in a tertiary world, not a binary world, not this or that. There is a this and that and a third thing. There is always a third thing. There is always a positive, a negative, and a neutral. A proton, an electron, and a neutron. Father, Son, Holy Ghost. Osiris, Isis, Horus. You can trace this to almost any cultural idea of the cosmos, and you will find three. You can find it in Greece, you can find it in Rome, you can trace it back on and on and on. This idea of three. Okay, law of three goes on top of this. This little funny thing, little guy here is called a hexad. This is the law of seven. This goes on top of this, on top of this. The law of seven says that everything in existence is always changing, always evolving, always in flux, never stops, is morphing like this all the time into infinity. Okay, so that is what the Enneagram is made up of. I'm going to go back to the original one, and now you can see how this works. See, here's the circle, law of one, here's the triangle, law of three, and here's the hexad, the law of seven. So it's interesting, if you divide the number 7 into 1, you do this right now, okay, you will get a number. And that number is 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7. And then it starts over again. 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7, forever. As far as we know, it's the only number that does that. Okay, so that is part of the mathematics that goes into the Enneagram. A lot that Pythagoras brought into the Enneagram along the way. So these are 9 emanations of source, of the one, yes? 9 expressions of the creator. 9 ways creation manifests. 9 archetypes. There are also 9 ways that we have forgotten essence, 9 ways that we got disconnected from source, and how we left source, because every type here disconnects from source in a slightly different way. These are 9 distinct ego structures. These are 9 distinct ways that the ego formed in us as human beings. All in here. So I'd like you to imagine, now I want you to, well, you don't have to imagine it, I'd like you to do it, is to take one hand and make a very small little hole here and bring it up to one eye. And some people, it's interesting, some people will do their right eye, some people will do their left eye, some people will use a different hand, okay? But find a little peephole here. And I want you to look through your peephole and look out at something. Anything in your room, just look out at something. Now you need to make this little peephole small. I used to use straws to make it small enough, okay? But try to make it small and see what you're looking at. Okay, now if you were here, if we were in the same room, I'd ask you what you saw. I've been in groups from, small to very large. And when we ask people what they saw, it's really interesting because everybody, even if they're in the same room, tends to find something different in the room. So for sure now between us, you are looking at something different than I am looking at. The idea here is that we are all looking through a certain lens, and we are all seeing things differently, and we all have a different perception. And we all tend to think that our lens and our perception is accurate. We all tend to think that the lens we're looking through is the one that is actually seeing or perceiving reality. Like the blind men with the elephant, where one found the tail and one found the leg and one found the trunk and one found the tusk and one found the ear. And they all thought that described what an elephant was. And of course, they were only sensing one tiny little part of this giant elephant. And that's the case for us. We are only seeing one tiny little part of reality. But we are assuming, and there's 8 billion of us now, doing that. And we are imagining that that is the way other people are seeing reality. And it's not. It's not. So if we think that what we're seeing is real and what somebody else is seeing is inaccurate or not real, or the judgments go on, then you can see how we are not going to be able to communicate with each other. And you don't have to imagine too far then why we're in the mess we're in on planet Earth and how we don't understand each other. So if you take this little peephole now and you make it a little bigger, make it this big, and look out at whatever you were looking at. Now, what do you see? See, when I was doing my little one like this, I see a palm tree out in my yard. But when I make it bigger, I see the palm tree, I see the neighbor's tree across the way, and I see a big geranium here on a table out on my patio. Okay, so I'm sure the same for you now. You're seeing more of reality, more of reality. You have expanded your viewpoint. You have expanded the lens. Okay, make it even bigger now. Go like this. Now I can see, whole window, all kinds of trees, all kinds of flowers. I live in Arizona, so I'm seeing all kinds of cactus there in bloom now. And it's like, it's just really beautiful out there. So see what you're seeing now. See what you're seeing. But mostly note how much bigger your viewpoint is if you expand it, how much more inclusive it is of more of reality. So the problem is not with having a viewpoint. Each one of these is a viewpoint. It is thinking that that is the only viewpoint and that our perception is the right one. I'm sure you relate. I'm sure you relate to this. This is what's happening on the planet. So each of these is a lens. Each of these is a perception. Each of these is a way that we see reality. And each one of them is incredibly then small, incredibly small. You know that our sensory perception as humans is so infinitesimally small anyway. A butterfly sees way more colors than we do. A dog smells way more than we do, hears way more than we do. If you have a cat or have ever had a cat, you know that a cat is sensing like a whole other invisible world somewhere. They're just uncanny. So the point here is to see how small this perception is, how small our perceptions have become, and how stuck we are in them, in that we think ours is the true one. We think ours, if we take it far enough, which people have done over and over, we think ours is the truth. Okay, now do something for me. I want you to get a piece of paper, and I should have told you this in the beginning. I want you to get just a blank piece of paper like this. And we're going to draw a smiley face on it. You need to pause this to get something. Go ahead, pause it, come back, get a paper and a pen, okay? Okay, now draw your smiley face. All right, I'm going to show you mine. Here's my smiley face. Okay, looks like a pumpkin, right? It's like a pumpkin. Okay. Now we're going to say that this is you and I as a baby, when you first popped out, fresh from heaven, totally innocent, totally impressionable, no agenda, no ego yet, okay, just open slate, ready for this experience of life in this dimension. So what starts to happen for every baby in one way or another is little things start to happen in their environment that are not perfect, because none of us were raised by Buddha, probably. And our parents weren't raised by Buddha either. Okay, so they come in with certain ideas and certain belief systems and certain ways that they parent that might not be optimal. If you have children, you really understand this, because none of us probably did it perfectly. I'm saying that a little bit tongue in cheek. Okay, so let's say something happens with the baby. The baby gets colic and is having a very hard time in the beginning, and is so uncomfortable, and is one of these babies that cries all night, and because they're so uncomfortable. Well, that is going to be a not positive experience for this baby right out of the gate, and there'll be a little bit of a contraction that happens around this little innocent one. And I want you to make a little wrinkle in the paper like that. Okay, now let's say the baby's not breastfed. That would be another. In my era, nobody was breastfed. It wasn't cool. It wasn't cool then. So depending, I'm just giving you examples here. That would be another, like, some disconnect from nurturing and disconnect from the baby getting what they need. Okay, let's imagine that the baby is left in the crib to cry all night, because that was very popular belief for a while. Okay, there's going to be another little something that happens in the baby that contracts away from this experience in order to cope with it. Okay, the baby is starting to develop coping mechanisms now. Now let's say that maybe the baby is left for a weekend with auntie or with a babysitter or something, so the parents can have a little time, right? And the baby, this happened in my family where my little sister was 6 months old and I was like almost 3. I was 3. And I was fine with my parents leaving, but she wasn't, and she got very sick and they had to come home. They didn't get the weekend, right? They had to come home. These are semi-traumatic experiences for little babies. Now, of course, it's not heavy duty trauma. We're not talking about that right now. That would even be more so. These are just the little things that happen. Okay, now let's say, so there's another little wrinkle. Well, let's say now that, because this is what it's the truth for me, at around age 2.5, another baby comes home. And now the attention in the whole household most likely is going to shift to that new one. And the 2.5-year-old is now going to develop some kind of strategy to cope with that loss and that difference. Okay, so another little wrinkle. This is the formation of the ego right here. The ego is a coping mechanism. It is a way to survive. It is a way to overcome this accumulation of small experiences that cause the baby to contract. The ego is a contraction. All right, so let's say then we're going to kindergarten or preschool and your crayons get stolen, or somebody hits you, or something like that. Or you don't want to take a nap. Okay, all right, something else happens. Another little, okay, these personalities here, 1 through 9, are developing now. Now we come in with the personality. We come in with one of these temperaments, and then we respond to these life situations accordingly. So you can have 2 children and 1 family of the same circumstances, and they will respond differently, right? But the ego is forming now. So then let's say something else happens and something else, just little things. The ego now is forming and it's becoming a knot. So make a knot. Make a knot. A nice, tight knot. Okay? It's totally contracted now, like it's glued together. Now, this is a Charlie horse of the ego. It's an energetic Charlie horse. It sits in here somewhere around the solar plexus, and you can feel it. The breathing changes, and the child can get pretty neurotic around this stuff, or they just keep developing more and more of a cover-up, more and more of a covering over this essential self. Their first essential self has disappeared now. And this is the personality forming. This is the ego forming. By the time a child is between 4 and 6, it's formed. So then as young adults and adults, we just keep reinforcing it usually, unless we find a way to unravel. The Enneagram is a way. First, it addresses what it is exactly, each one of these, and then it shows us how to unravel each one of these, and it's different for each one. The ego manifestation is different in each of these types, not all the same. Okay, so how do you heal this? How do you heal a Charlie horse? Don't you reach down and go, and you massage it, or you stretch it, or you get heat and put on it so that it will what? Relax, right? The Charlie horse then relaxes, because a Charlie horse is this. It goes like this. Now relaxes. So here we are. That's exactly what happens with this. You have to relax it. Now, it's formed now, and it's probably not going to relax until, as an adult, we start to put attention on this and we start to find ways, some kind of pathway, some kind of tool. The Enneagram is that, some kind of tool to start to figure this out. So let's say like yoga came my way, you know, when I was 24. So, okay, huge life-changing event for me, and a huge part of my ego self, my false self, started to relax. I started to see through it. I started to see a lot about me that was not real. That was not real. Okay. And then something like that might have happened for you, and it might have happened earlier. Maybe it happened, maybe you fell in love and something in you just kind of lets go. And suddenly we're more tolerant and we don't have all the judgments that we usually have, and life seems wonderful, and somehow we are able to love everybody now. Okay, like that. And so it relaxes, something relaxes in us. Okay. And in the falling in love process, a lot of what we thought was real about us does show up as not serving us, doesn't it? And it starts to fall away. Relationships are magic for that. Okay. Now let's say then you discover something else. Okay, I mentioned to myself, I became a parent. Huge part of who I thought I was fell away. Matter of fact, it was pretty scary. Okay, so let's say that happened for you, or something similar. Right? I mean, marriage will do it. That starts to unravel you. Love unravels us, doesn't it? Okay. Then let's find another one. When the Enneagram came along for me, it was just giant. And then I've done many countless spiritual trips, spiritual paths, studied with many people, and each one contributed to this unfolding of my ego. Now, when the Enneagram came along, before it did, I was praying for something that would penetrate the personality, because I was noticing that my yoga students weren't changing in any kind of big way, and they were coming back. And I noticed it about myself too, coming back week after week after week with the same issues. Okay? Now, yoga is great. It's just that I discovered that alone, it wasn't enough. And way too slow. Okay, so now let's just say that we do mature and we do start to relax this ego. This is like an ideal situation. Okay, we'll spread it out now and smooth it out. There you are. There's the little guy that came in, never went anywhere, never disappeared. The essence of us never disappears, no matter how we attempt to cover it up. So here it is. But what's different about it? What's different? It's a wrinkle, isn't it? Now, what are those wrinkles? Experiences. Hopefully experiences that we have learned from, because that's how we will grow. And then hopefully we become wise elders, and then we become innocent again. Only this time with wisdom. The essence never went anywhere. It just got covered up in 9 different ways. Okay. How are we doing? Okay. This is called the levels. Now, you know how the ego is formed. And I have to imagine that this is a cylinder, and the Enneagram symbol up here, the yantra, is on top like this. It's on top like this. Okay. I keep forgetting to put the numbers on here so you could see better. Okay, so it's on top, and each type then of each point has 9 levels that go down, 9 levels. right? You can picture that. Okay, at the very bottom here that I have shaded in are the unhealthy levels. The 3 here in the middle is the part of our consciousness that is in the healing process. And then when we come up to the top 3 levels, we start to have more and more awareness, more and more presence. And these are the level 3 here, and level 2 is we start walking with presence. We start to have presence whenever we are anywhere. Now, the first one up here, level 1, is walking as presence. I and the Father are one. There is no trying to be present now. There is nothing, none of that. We are that. Of course, that is a very high state. And it is said that many of the masters were in that state, like Jesus was in that state. Buddha was in that state. Krishna was in that state. Confucius was in that state. A very long list, many saints and mystics, and modern mystics as well, who are in that state of oneness with their true nature. That is level 1. Now, as we go down these levels, there is less and less presence, less and less awareness, less and less choice, more and more reaction, because there's more and more ego activity as we go down here, more and more isolation, more and more pain, more and more destruction, and more identification with that knot, with that covering, with that coping mechanism. More and more identification with that. Because even though the original coping mechanism for the baby worked, actually, because it did help them survive, but it was meant to be like a Band-Aid, and then it became a bandage, and then it became a cast, and then it became a body cast, until finally that becomes who we think we are. See that process? Because we didn't take the Band-Aid off, because nobody knew how, right? Okay, so now as adults, we know how. As we go up the levels here, there is more and more awareness, that self-awareness, more and more freedom, more and more presence, more and more energy, more and more creativity, more and more expression, more and more choice, and more relaxation. This is very constricted as we go down, and it's very expansive and inclusive as we go up. It is only presence that brings us up the levels, presence. And in order to have more presence, we have to relax the ego. So every time we relax the ego, presence, which is our true nature, comes in, because it's like a vacuum, and that's actually who we already are. So there it is. The levels are so intrinsic and so important to understand the Enneagram, because we find out how deeply we have lost connection with our true nature, and how deeply asleep we have become, and how deeply mechanical we have become. It is my teachers, Don Riso and Russ Hudson, that brought in the levels to the Enneagram, and I can't even imagine those levels now being absent from the understanding, because we wouldn't have a way to assess ourselves here going up and down. Okay. All right. Now notice we've added something here to the basic Enneagram. We've added these lines which divide the Enneagram into 3 parts. These are called triads, and Gurdjieff himself called them brains, 3 brains. He called us 3-brained individuals, 3-brained beings. We have an instinctive brain, which is body. We have a heart brain, which is feeling, and we have a mind brain, which is thinking. And we all have them, but we are unbalanced, and usually there's just one that is dominant, and the other 2 are somewhat indistinct or not yet integrated into us as whole beings. the top instinctive triad issue here is anger. The heart triad's issue is shame, and the mind triad's issue is fear or anxiety. If no matter, all of us will land in one of these triads. You see there are 3 in each triad, and that will start the process of understanding what our first reactions are in life. It's either going to be we're going to react with anger, which could also be irritation or annoyance or impatience or frustration, those kinds of anger, or we're going to respond with shame, which often looks like depression or sadness, okay? Or we're going to react with anxiety, our first reaction. Now, we all have anger and we all have shame. We all have all of them. But the first reaction, I'm in this triad, for instance, if we do react because we don't know another way of responding in that moment, will be with anxiety, we'll get nervous. Okay, so these are the triads of the Enneagram, and they come up over and over in the study, the longer study of the Enneagram. Okay, so let's look at the 9 types now, a skeletal review of each type. Let's start here with the 8. Now, we're looking at the instinctive triad first, because we're starting with the body. And it's interesting, when I learned that about the Enneagram, I realized that it's how my yoga teacher, Iyengar, also views the progression with the body in yoga. So we start with the standing poses, which are about body and grounded and being here present on planet Earth. Then we go to back bends, which is the heart opening, right? And then we go to inversions upside down, which is the mind. So it was the same thing. And I see so many of those meshings with so many spiritual traditions in the Enneagram. It just happens a lot. Okay, the 8 is called the challenger. Okay, they are powerful, strong, vital, tremendous energy, a lot of self-confidence, very assertive. They tend to always be in charge. They tend to be the bosses. We've almost all had an 8 boss. When they get less healthy, when they go down the levels, they become not just assertive, but aggressive. They become dominating. They become controlling. They can be intimidating. They can be destructive. They, at their worst, they become at their worst. They have a very short fuse. These are the ragers. Okay, remember, anger is in this band here. These are the ragers. The energy has a red color, red. Spain is an 8 country. The flamenco is an 8 dance. Hip hop and street dancing are 8 dances. Drumming is 8 music. The stomping of the feet and the hard-hitting music and hard-hitting dances are 8 energy. I'm sure you can imagine that. Now, when the 8 is at their worst, they are incredibly destructive. This could be a Stalin. This could be a Franco. It's the Godfather image. Tony Soprano. Tony Soprano was an 8. Yes, get the picture? Okay. Now, at their best, however, the 8C can take this energy that they have so much of, and they can be the most constructive of the Enneagram. Most constructive. They can use that energy not to conquer other people or dominate other people or countries. They can use it for self-mastery. That's what martial arts are about, to use this kind of energy as for self-mastery. And the 8 then becomes magnanimous. Magnanimous, they use that energy for the betterment of mankind and can become historically great, like MLK, like Nelson Mandela, Maya Angelou, and Gurdjieff himself was an 8. Okay, we go to the 9, which is called the peacemaker. Easygoing. Long fuse here, long fuse. As a matter of fact, they don't know they're angry. They're in denial of their anger. Okay, the 8 enrages, the 9 is in denial. They don't know they're angry. They push it under the rug. Okay, so the 9 seems to be like never angry until they are. Until one day they throw the dish on the floor or the computer through the window. Something that's a real thing that happened. Okay, but all in all, they are very trusting. They are accepting. They don't have an agenda. They are fantastic listeners. Therefore, they are great therapists, great mediators in any conflict. They can see all sides. Okay, when they get less healthy, they go into so much denial of their energy that they become doormats. They just become accommodators. They become complacent, disengaged. They're in tremendous denial of not just anger, but all kinds of conflict or all kinds of intensity. They just want to get away from it. And they tend to just become more and more invisible. Mm-hmm. Now, Mexico is a 9 country. You know how you feel when you go to Mexico? Like you can just kind of relax. Okay. Hawaii, step off the plane in Hawaii and you go, everything's okay, right? Okay, now at their best, the 9 is all embracing. They are genuine peacemakers. They really are conflict resolvers, just innately. Okay, they create unity. They're interested in unity. They heal conflicts all the time. Abraham Lincoln was a 9. The Dalai Lama is a 9. Jung was a 9. Joseph Campbell was a 9. Some great ones, huh? Okay, now we move to the 1, which is called the idealist or the reformer. Still in this instinctive or body triad right here. Okay, they know they're angry, but they've suppressed it. They've got a lid on it like a pressure cooker. And so that anger is not the rager like the 8, but becomes this kind of seething resentment that goes on for years and years. Their irritation, impatience, annoyance, easily annoyed. They are, however, very principled. Remember, they're the idealists. Okay? Very principled, ethical, very high ideals. Okay, they are noble, and ethical, and integrity is just the biggest thing for them. Now, if they get unhealthy, less healthy, down the levels, they become perfectionistic, extremely critical and judgmental, and eventually fundamentalism grows out of this attitude. So whenever we see fundamentalism can be a religion, it can be something like the Hells Angels, where you have this kind of ideology and everybody sticks to it and everybody thinks it's right and everybody thinks it's real and everybody thinks that's the truth. Anything can be fundamental. Yoga can be fundamentalist. Eating and food and diet, look at that, how fundamentalist that has gotten, where people think there's the right way to do that and then try to impress it on other people. Okay, so this lives in the lower 1, the unhealthy 1. However, the 1 at their best are discerning, noble, ethical, morally heroic. Gandhi was a 1. Henry David Thoreau was a 1. Michelle Obama is a 1. Russia is a 1 country. So Tolstoy was a 1. Dostoevsky was a 1. Lenin was a 1. My teacher, yoga teacher, Iyengar, was a 1. Okay, that's the 1. Now we're moving into the heart triad. Here's the 2, the helper. They're called the helper. Empathetic, caring, sincere, warm. They're the mother image, okay? That's the kitchen table that everybody wants to sit around. And she tends to, he or she tends to nurture people naturally, whether it's with food. Oh, by the way, Italy is a two country. So if you've been to Italy, you probably know that when you go to Italy, you feel nurtured almost right away. Like when you meet somebody in Italy, they say, "Do you like our food? Do you like our food?" They want to know that you're happy and you feel loved. Okay, now this is the two. This is the two. They have a sense of love, of unconditional love. They are sincere. They're warm. They're huggers, right? Okay, now when they become less healthy, when they go down the levels, they can become then hoverers, right? Or they lean in. They lose their sense of boundary and they lean in. It's not just helping anymore. It's like it starts to be intrusive. It starts to be possessive. They become people pleasers and they become codependent and they produce codependency in relationship. That's the two. That's the two. And they can become, in the very low levels, obsessive. Now, at their best, the twos are altruistic. They impart a sense of belonging. They always encourage other people. They see in other people what other people don't see in themselves. And they truly, truly understand unconditional love. Mother Teresa was a two. Eleanor Roosevelt was a two. Desmond Tutu was a two. And now we move into the three, which is called the achiever, as in overachiever. Okay, this is the US. This is our country now, so this is important. Okay, the three is right from the get-go, from a child now, right from the get-go. They're adaptable. In other words, their coping mechanisms started to be at a very young age, chameleon-like. Like they would change into anything that they needed to change into to get the love or to get the light of the parents, to light up their parents' eyes, to get their approval. So they become shapeshifters almost eventually. Threes are usually very successful, charming, self-assured, very ambitious, extremely ambitious. When they become less healthy, we have a problem. They become opportunistic. Now they must be the best. They must be the best at everything, at everything. This is where narcissism resides. All egos are narcissistic, but this is where the narcissistic personality disorder resides because the three is so identified with image, so identified with image. And if you think about our country in this sense, how we feel like we are exceptional in all ways and that we're always extremely interested in how we're presenting ourselves. Instead of coming to a reckoning with what we are doing or have done, we tend to just care about the image we're presenting. Take a look at that. Okay, now the three at their best, however, are authentic. They are truly genuine role models of their culture. See, the US is meant to be that. We could be that. When I do the series, I spend at least an hour and a half on each of these types. And so we look deeply into the US and what it's doing and not doing, and how it's like, at the moment, probably not a very healthy three. But we could be this role model, this for enlightenment, for the best of mankind. So the best of the three is self-developed, extremely inspirational, and cares about helping other people be the best they can be. So Oprah Winfrey is a three, Deepak Chopra is a three, Tony Robbins is a three. Okay, the four individualist, romantic, introspective, artistic. Now, they're not necessarily artists, but they usually have an artistic temperament, an artistic nature, and usually something in their lives represents that they are artistic about that. And sometimes the four's whole life is about the artistry. Their whole life is a work of art, and everything they touch is like that. I know fours like that. They are introspective. They are very sensitive. They have very high aesthetics. France is a four country. Now, when they're less healthy, they become what we might say the more negative part of the artistic temperament. They become moody, oversensitive, dramatic, melancholic, depressed, and often victims, victim mentality. Some of the fours that have gone that way might be Judy Garland, Edith Piaf, Maria Callas, and many, many others. Now, just to be clear here, a world without fours would be a bleak world indeed, because the high four, the mature four, is highly creative, transformative, in fact, redemptive even. They are life renewers, and some examples of that are, as artists, Marlon Brando, Bob Dylan, Frida Kahlo, Rudolf Nureyev, Prince, Angelina Jolie, Andrew Harvey. People that have gone deep down into themselves and found an expression for those dark places the four can go to, and then they bring it back out to share with the world and discover that what they were feeling was universal. That's what happened with Bob Dylan. He had no idea how universal his poetry was. But of course, the whole generation identified with it. France is a four country. And now we move into the mind triad. The five is the investigator. This is the science mind. This is the cerebral temperament. Intense, insightful, genius, in fact, focused, curious, profound. We've got Madame Curie, we've got Newton, we've got Steve Jobs. Many, the list is very, very long. They're the explorers, they're the inventors, they're the innovators. They're the ones that go down to South America, South Antarctica, and, live down there. They tend to be quite iconoclastic. So when they become less healthy, what happens is they become more and more detached, more and more isolated, more and more eccentric. So we've got somebody like, let's say, Howard Hughes or Kurt Cobain, when they go all the way to the bottom of those levels that I showed you. Except Great Britain is a five country. Now, the best of the five, however, they are visionaries. Original thought, not just hashed over thought, not just kind of like redoing an old thought, but new thought. Clarity, profundity, illumination. This could be Einstein, Nietzsche, Stephen Hawking, Tesla, Eckhart Tolle, and my teacher, Russ Hudson. They are all fives, like brilliant fives. Okay, we go to the sixth, which is called the loyalist. They are committed, hardworking, loyal, like it says, reliable, security-minded, responsible. They show up. Sixes show up, and not only do they show up, they go the extra mile. They are often first responders. They are often firemen or policemen or paramedics in the military. They're the first ones to show up to save the day, and they do save the day, but they don't realize their own capacity for that often and are very self-deferential, and as a matter of fact, have a tremendous amount of self-doubt. They do not see themselves as winners. They do not see themselves as successful usually. They do not see themselves as that one that saves the day. They are team players, truly egalitarian. They see everybody as equal, truly, and they play their part as a team without standing out. Now, when they get unhealthy, see, what starts to happen with this self-doubt is they become very anxious, very insecure. They are defensive. They are stressed. Worry is their middle name. That's one way you can tell if you're a 6 or not. They become very indecisive, eventually suspicious, and eventually paranoid. If we get to the very unhealthy realm of the 6, we've got a Hitler, a Nixon, J. Edgar Hoover, and lots of others we could name who were so paranoid they became totally divisive. Whereas the healthy 6 brings everybody together, the unhealthy 6 pulls them apart. The best of the 6 are truly heroes. They are courageous, they are awake, they want others to be awake. RFK Sr. was a 6, and I believe RFK Jr. is probably a 6 as well. Malcolm X was a 6, and the whole Lord of the Rings story is a 6 story. Gandalf is the high 6. Frodo is the 6 who did not want to save the day, right? Didn't want to have any part of that destiny until he realized that it was his destiny, and then he went all out. And then Gollum was the low 6. Huh? Okay. Germany is the 6th country. And we move finally to the 7, which is the enthusiast. They are the free spirits of the Enneagram, generally spontaneous, versatile, very accomplished because they kind of do everything. They've got many irons and many fires. They kind of go everywhere and do everything. Steven Spielberg is a 7. Lin-Manuel Miranda is a 7. Hamilton guy. If you look him up on Wikipedia, the list is so long. It's like, he's a lyricist, a playwright, an actor, a producer, a dancer, a rapper. You see what I mean? This is the 7. This is the 7. Leonardo da Vinci was a 7, extremely prolific, extremely accomplished, often visionaries. Now, when they go down the levels, they become, you can imagine, overextended, scattered, impulsive. So what used to be spontaneous is now impulsivity. They become eventually reckless and can be totally self-destructive, like Janis Joplin or Anthony Bourdain, for instance. Now, the 7 at their best, by the way, Brazil is a 7 country. The samba is a 7 dance. At their best, the 7 is joyous, positive. They see all possibility. If you ask a 7, if you're in trouble and you ask for help, the 7 will come up with 6 different ways to make it better. They can see possibility. They are true visionaries. They can see the broad picture of how things are going into the future and can then participate in that. They are at their high level full of gratitude. They feel like their lives are magical and actually ecstatic. Mozart was a 7, Benjamin Franklin was a 7, Dolly Parton is a 7, and St. Francis was a 7. We made it all the way around the mandala, all the way around the circle. So the Enneagram, as you can see now, I hope you can see now, is a dynamic, organic process for personal growth and finding our place in the evolution of our world. The Enneagram holds the key to understand who we are and who we are not. It helps us move from ego conscious to essence consciousness. It shows us how the structure of the ego that we have to know that structure, serves as a doorway to essence, a gateway to presence. All of us, I think, are here to have a higher consciousness at the end of our lives than at the beginning. The Enneagram is a call to presence. It's how to live a presence-based life. This takes a steady inner hunger for real growth. It takes a will to learn and a willingness. It takes curiosity and tremendous courage as a spiritual path. Are you ready? Okay, that would be wonderful if you are. Thank you. Namaste.